The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete courtyard of Naval Special Warfare Command as Lieutenant Sarah Chun adjusted her uniform for the third time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of the moment she had worked toward for 8 grueling years. Today marked her first assignment briefing at the highest levels of military intelligence, and she knew that every eye would be scrutinizing her presence in what had traditionally been an exclusive boys' club. Sarah's journey to this moment had been anything but conventional. Born to immigrant parents who had sacrificed everything to give their daughter opportunities they never had, she grew up in a modest apartment above her family's small restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown. Her father, a former engineer who had been forced to start over in America, would often tell her stories of courage and perseverance while they worked side by side in the cramped kitchen after school. Her mother, though quiet and reserved, possessed an inner strength that Sarah had inherited and would later need to draw upon during the most challenging moments of her military career. The decision to join the Navy had surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. She had been studying biochemistry at Stanford University on a full scholarship when the September 11th attacks occurred. Like many young Americans, she felt a profound shift in her understanding of duty and service. Unlike most, however, she made the life-altering decision to leave her prestigious academic program and enlist. Her parents were devastated, unable to comprehend why their brilliant daughter would abandon the security and prestige of a scientific career for the uncertainty and danger of military life. Basic training at Naval Station Great Lakes had been Sarah's first real taste of the challenges that lay ahead. The physical demands were intense, but manageable for someone who had spent her teenage years practicing martial arts and running the hilly streets of San Francisco. The mental challenges proved more complex. As one of only a handful of women in her unit, and the only Asian American, Sarah quickly learned that she would need to work twice as hard to earn half the recognition her male counterparts received. Instructors who might overlook mistakes from others scrutinized every aspect of her performance, searching for any sign of weakness or inadequacy. But Sarah possessed something that set her apart from her peers, an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure, and an analytical mind that could process complex information rapidly while others panicked. These qualities caught the attention of her commanding officers, who began to see potential in the quiet, determined young woman who never complained, never made excuses, and consistently outperformed expectations. The path to becoming a Navy SEAL had been even more arduous. When Sarah first expressed interest in special operations, she was met with skepticism, discouragement, and outright hostility. Women were not officially allowed in SEAL teams, and the informal barriers were even higher than the official ones. But Sarah had learned something important during her childhood. When people tell you that you don't belong somewhere, sometimes the best response is to prove them wrong through excellence rather than argument. She spent 2 years preparing for the selection process, training with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Every morning began at 4 a.m. with a 6-mile run, followed by swimming, strength training, and combat skills practice. She studied military history, tactics, and languages with the same dedication she had once applied to her chemistry studies. Her weekends were spent in survival training courses, martial arts competitions, and any other activity that might give her an edge in the selection process. When the opportunity finally came to test for special operations, Sarah was ready in ways that went far beyond physical preparation. She had developed an unshakable mental toughness and a clarity of purpose that would carry her through the most challenging moments of Hell Week and beyond. The training was designed to break even the strongest candidates, and Sarah watched as men who seemed far more physically imposing than her rang the bell and quit. But each time she felt the urge to give up, she thought about her parents' sacrifices, about the restaurant they had built from nothing, and about the quiet strength her mother had shown in facing every challenge life had thrown at their family. The day she graduated from SEAL training marked a historic moment, though it was celebrated quietly due to the sensitive nature of her assignment. Sarah had become one of the first women to complete the program, though her presence in the community remained largely classified for operational security reasons. Her instructors, many of whom had initially doubted her ability to succeed, now spoke of her with a respect typically reserved for the most elite operators in the military. Her first deployments had been in support roles, providing intelligence analysis and tactical support for missions in the Middle East. Sarah quickly proved that her value extended far beyond breaking gender barriers. Her language skills, cultural knowledge, and analytical abilities made her an invaluable asset in complex operations where understanding local dynamics could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. She had a gift for reading people and situations that seemed almost intuitive, but was actually the result of years of careful study and observation. Over the course of 5 deployments, Sarah had earned the respect of her teammates through competence, reliability, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. She had saved lives through quick thinking and precise action. She had provided intelligence that prevented attacks and helped capture high-value targets. Most importantly, she had proven that excellence in special operations had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with character, intelligence, and dedication. But respect within her immediate team was different from acceptance at the highest levels of military leadership. As Sarah approached the imposing doors of the Pentagon War Room, where today's briefing would take place, she knew that many of the officers inside would be seeing her for the first time. Some would view her presence as a political statement or social experiment, rather than recognizing her as a qualified operator who had earned her place through merit and performance. The war room itself was a testament to American military power and precision. State-of-the-art technology lined the walls. Multiple screens displayed real-time intelligence from around the world, and the air hummed with the quiet intensity of officers and analysts working to protect national security. As Sarah entered, conversations paused momentarily as personnel took note of the small Asian woman in Navy fatigues walking among them. She could feel the weight of their attention, some curious, some skeptical, some openly hostile. Admiral James Morrison, the operations commanding officer, was a 30-year veteran whose reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by his old-school views on military tradition. He had built his career during an era when the military was far less diverse, and his comfort with change had not kept pace with the evolving nature of modern warfare. As he reviewed the personnel files for the day's briefing, his eyes had lingered on Sarah's photograph and service record with what could only be described as bewilderment. The other senior officers present represented a cross-section of military leadership, from progressive thinkers who embraced the changing face of the armed forces to traditionalists who viewed any deviation from historical norms with suspicion. Among them was Admiral Rebecca Torres, one of the highest-ranking women in the Navy, whose own path to leadership had been marked by similar challenges to those Sarah now faced. There was also General Michael Harrison, whose son had served alongside Sarah in Afghanistan and had spoken glowingly of her capabilities and character. As the briefing began, Sarah took her assigned seat near the back of the room, conscious of the fact that many eyes continued to track her movements. The mission being discussed involved a complex operation in Southeast Asia that would require detailed cultural knowledge, language skills, and the ability to operate effectively in a region where American military presence was both necessary and politically sensitive. As the details unfolded, it became clear that this was exactly the type of operation where Sarah's unique qualifications would be most valuable. The presentation proceeded with military precision, covering intelligence assessments, logistical requirements, and operational timelines. Sarah listened intently, her mind automatically processing the information and identifying potential challenges and opportunities that others might miss. She had learned to trust her instincts, which had been honed through years of experience in similar environments, and she could sense aspects of the mission that would require careful consideration. When Admiral Morrison opened the floor for questions and input, the room fell silent. This was the moment Sarah had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. She knew that her analysis could contribute significantly to the mission's success, but she also understood that speaking up would make her a target for those who questioned her presence in the room. The weight of representing not just herself, but all the women who might follow in her footsteps pressed heavily on her shoulders. Finally, Sarah raised her hand, her voice clear and steady as she addressed the room. Her question was intelligent, well-informed, and demonstrated a deep understanding of the cultural and tactical complexities involved in the proposed operation. For a moment, the room was silent as the senior officers processed not just her words, but the confidence and expertise with which she had delivered them. It was in that moment of silence that Admiral Morrison made his fateful comment, a remark that he would later claim was intended as humor, but which revealed the underlying attitudes that had made Sarah's journey so challenging. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Sarah felt the familiar sting of being reduced to a stereotype rather than recognized for her capabilities and contributions. But what happened next would transform not just that moment, but Sarah's entire career and the future of women in special operations. The response from the other admirals in the room would send shockwaves through the military hierarchy and create a turning point that no one in that war room could have anticipated. The young woman who had started her day, nervously adjusting her uniform, was about to discover that her years of sacrifice, training, and excellence had earned her something far more valuable than tolerance or acceptance. She had earned genuine respect from the leaders who mattered most, and they were about to make that respect unmistakably clear to everyone present. Admiral Morrison's words echoed through the war room with the force of a physical blow. "Well, Lieutenant, I suppose we should be grateful they make uniforms in your size now," he said with a chuckle that revealed both his discomfort with Sarah's presence and his assumption that others in the room shared his outdated perspective. The comment was delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who had never had to prove his right to exist in the spaces he occupied, someone who had never felt the sting of being reduced to his physical characteristics rather than recognized for his capabilities. Sarah felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks, the same sensation she had experienced countless times throughout her military career when faced with comments that sought to diminish her achievements and reduce her to a novelty. For a split second, the carefully constructed composure she had maintained throughout years of similar encounters threatened to crack. The 24 other officers in the room seemed to freeze, waiting to see how she would respond to what was clearly an inappropriate and unprofessional comment from a superior officer. But Sarah had learned something valuable during her years in special operations. The moment when someone tries to make you smaller is often the moment when your true strength becomes most visible. She had faced enemy fire, survived Hell Week, and earned her place among the most elite warriors in the world. She would not be diminished by the narrow-minded assumptions of one man, regardless of his rank or position. Drawing upon the inner strength that had carried her through every challenge in her life, Sarah straightened her shoulders and met Admiral Morrison's gaze directly. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm, professional, and carried the quiet authority of someone who had proven herself under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. "Sir, I appreciate your concern about uniform availability. I can assure you that the Navy has been very accommodating in ensuring that all personnel, regardless of size, have access to appropriate gear for our missions." The response was perfectly calibrated, professional enough to avoid insubordination while making it clear that she would not be intimidated or reduced to the butt of casual jokes. But what happened next transformed the moment from a simple exchange into something far more significant and lasting. Admiral Rebecca Torres, whose own journey to high-ranking leadership had been marked by similar challenges, was the first to respond. Rising slowly from her chair, her movement deliberate and unmistakable, she turned towards Sarah's position and rendered a crisp, formal salute. The gesture was not just a sign of respect for Sarah's rank, but a powerful statement that excellence in military service deserved recognition regardless of who demonstrated it. The sight of Admiral Torres saluting Sarah sent a shock wave through the room that was almost palpable. For a moment, time seemed suspended as the other officers processed what they were witnessing. This was not a casual gesture of encouragement or a symbolic nod to diversity and inclusion. This was a senior admiral, one of the most respected leaders in the Navy, formally acknowledging the achievements and contributions of a junior officer in a way that demanded attention and respect. General Michael Harrison was the next to stand, his own salute sharp and purposeful. His decision carried additional weight because his son had served alongside Sarah in Afghanistan and had returned home with stories of her courage, competence, and character under fire. The general knew that his salute was not based on political correctness or social pressure, but on the first-hand accounts of her performance in combat situations where lives depended on skill and judgment rather than gender or background. Admiral David Chun, no relation to Sarah despite sharing a surname, followed suit with his own salute. His recognition carried particular significance because of his role in strategic planning and his reputation for focusing solely on results and capability rather than politics or personalities. When Admiral Chun showed respect, People throughout the military hierarchy paid attention because his approval was known to be based entirely on merit and performance. One by one, the other admirals in the room began to rise and salute, creating a domino effect that transformed the entire atmosphere of the briefing. Admiral Patricia Williams, whose expertise in intelligence operations had made her one of the most influential voices in national security, stood and rendered her salute with a precision that spoke to years of military discipline and respect for excellence. Admiral Robert Martinez, the Navy's leading expert on special operations, followed with his own gesture of recognition. Each salute represented more than individual respect for Sarah's achievements. Together, they constituted a powerful repudiation of the attitude that Admiral Morrison had displayed and a clear message about the values that should guide military leadership. These were not officers responding to pressure or making political statements. These were combat veterans and strategic leaders acknowledging excellence when they saw it, regardless of who embodied it. Admiral Morrison found himself in an increasingly uncomfortable position as he watched his peers demonstrate their respect for the young officer he had just attempted to diminish. The casual arrogance he had displayed moments earlier began to evaporate as he realized that his comment had not only been inappropriate, but had revealed him to be out of step with the evolving standards of military leadership. The other officers' responses made it clear that Sarah's presence in the room was not a matter of political correctness or social experimentation, but a recognition of her earned place among the military's elite. The silence in the room was profound, broken only by the sound of chairs being pushed back as more officers stood to show their respect. Admiral Thomas Sullivan, whose expertise in counterterrorism operations had made him a legend within special operations communities, rose and saluted with the gravity befitting someone who understood the courage and skill required to succeed in Sarah's field. His gesture carried particular weight because of his reputation for being utterly uncompromising when it came to operational standards and capability. Colonel Maria Rodriguez, though not an admiral, felt compelled to stand and salute as well, recognizing in Sarah a kindred spirit who had faced similar challenges in breaking through barriers in military service. Her gesture represented the perspective of countless women throughout the military who had fought for recognition and respect in their chosen fields of service. As the salutes continued, Sarah felt a profound shift in her understanding of her place within the military hierarchy. These officers were not just acknowledging her rank or paying lip service to diversity initiatives. They were recognizing her as a peer, someone whose achievements and capabilities had earned genuine respect from the highest levels of military leadership. The moment represented validation not just of her individual journey, but of the principle that excellence in military service should be recognized and rewarded regardless of who demonstrates it. The emotional impact of the moment was overwhelming, though Sarah maintained her military bearing throughout. These were the leaders she had looked up to throughout her career, officers whose decisions affected global security and whose respect was earned through demonstrated competence rather than given freely. To receive their acknowledgement in such a public and unmistakable way was both humbling and empowering. Admiral Morrison's face grew increasingly flushed as he realized the magnitude of his error in judgment. What he had intended as a casual comment designed to establish dominance and reinforce traditional hierarchies had instead exposed him as petty and out of touch with the values embodied by his peers. The respect being shown to Sarah was not manufactured or politically motivated, but genuine recognition from officers who had worked with her, reviewed her service record, and understood the significance of her achievements. The final admiral to stand was James Fletcher, whose role in overseeing special operations gave him intimate knowledge of Sarah's contributions to mission success. His salute was perhaps the most significant because it came from someone who had direct insight into her operational effectiveness and tactical capabilities. When Admiral Fletcher showed respect, it carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what Sarah had accomplished in some of the military's most challenging and dangerous assignments. As the last of the admirals completed their salutes and slowly returned to their seats, the war room was filled with a tension that was both uncomfortable and transformative. Admiral Morrison found himself isolated, his earlier comment having revealed attitudes that his peers clearly did not share or support. The moment had become a defining one, not just for Sarah's career, but for the military's evolving understanding of leadership, respect, and recognition. Sarah remained standing, acknowledging each salute with a dignity and professionalism that had defined her entire military career. She understood that this moment represented something larger than personal recognition. It was a statement about values, about the kind of military leadership that would guide the nation's defense in an increasingly complex and challenging world. The officers who had saluted her were not just showing respect for her individual achievements, but declaring their commitment to a meritocratic system where excellence was recognized regardless of its source. The transformation of the room's atmosphere was complete, but the implications of what had just occurred would resonate far beyond this single briefing. Word of the incident would spread through military channels, creating ripple effects that would influence policy, culture, and the expectations of future generations of military personnel. Sarah had entered the room as a junior officer, hoping to contribute to the mission discussion. She was about to leave as someone whose presence had fundamentally changed the conversation about leadership, respect, and recognition in the modern military. The silence that followed the salutes was pregnant with meaning, as everyone in the room processed what they had just witnessed and participated in. This was not just a moment of individual recognition, but a collective statement about the values that should guide military service and leadership in the 21st century. The weight of silence in the war room seemed to press against everyone present as the last admiral returned to his seat. Admiral Morrison's face had progressed from flushed embarrassment to a pale realization of how profoundly he had misjudged both the situation and his audience. The man who had entered the briefing with casual confidence in his authority and perspective now found himself completely isolated among his peers, his comment having exposed attitudes that were not just inappropriate, but fundamentally at odds with the values demonstrated by every other senior officer present. Sarah remained standing for a moment longer, her mind working to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. Throughout her military career, she had grown accustomed to fighting for recognition and respect, often settling for tolerance or grudging acceptance from superiors who viewed her presence as an unavoidable consequence of changing policies rather than a valuable addition to their capabilities. To receive such clear, unmistakable recognition from the highest levels of military leadership was almost overwhelming in its significance. As she finally took her seat, Sarah caught sight of Admiral Torres nodding almost imperceptibly in her direction. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable, a signal of solidarity from one woman who had faced similar challenges to another who was currently navigating them. Admiral Torres had reached her position through decades of exceptional service, brilliant strategic thinking, and an unwavering commitment to excellence that had gradually worn down the barriers she faced. Her salute to Sarah represented not just personal respect, but an acknowledgement of the younger officer's place in a continuing tradition of women who refused to accept limitations imposed by others' narrow vision. General Harrison cleared his throat, breaking the profound silence that had enveloped the room. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect through decades of distinguished service, but also a warmth that suggested personal investment in the conversation about to unfold. Lieutenant Chun, he began, his tone formal but respectful. Your question earlier demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking and cultural awareness that will be crucial to this mission's success. I wonder if you might elaborate on your concerns regarding the operational timeline. The invitation to speak was significant on multiple levels. General Harrison was not just asking for Sarah's professional opinion, but doing so in a way that explicitly validated her expertise and contributions. His reference to her earlier questions signaled to everyone present that he had been listening carefully to her input and valued her perspective enough to request additional insights. This was not charity or token inclusion, but genuine recognition of professional capability. Sarah rose again, her confidence bolstered by the unmistakable support she had just received from the room's senior leadership. Her voice was clear and steady as she began to outline her analysis of the proposed operation, drawing upon years of experience in similar environments and her deep understanding of the cultural and political complexities that could affect mission success. Her observations were detailed, nuanced, and demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that impressed even the most experienced officers present. The timing of our proposed insertion coincides with several local festivals that will significantly alter normal population patterns and security arrangements, Sarah explained, her words carrying the weight of someone who had spent years studying and operating in the region. While these celebrations might provide cover for our initial approach, they also create unpredictable variables that could compromise our extraction routes. Additionally, the increased presence of international observers during this period means that any operational mistakes could have significant diplomatic ramifications beyond the immediate tactical concerns. Admiral Chun leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued by Sarah's analysis. What would you recommend as an alternative approach, Lieutenant? His question was not just professional courtesy, but genuine curiosity about her strategic assessment. The Admiral's reputation for asking difficult questions and demanding precise answers made his engagement particularly meaningful. Sarah had anticipated this type of follow-up and had spent considerable time developing contingency recommendations based on her understanding of the operational environment. Her response demonstrated not just analytical capability, but the kind of creative problem-solving that distinguished exceptional officers from merely competent ones. She outlined a modified timeline that would take advantage of the cultural knowledge she possessed while minimizing the risks she had identified, presenting options that showed both tactical sophistication and diplomatic awareness. As Sarah spoke, Admiral Morrison found himself in the uncomfortable position of watching a junior officer command the attention and respect of his peers through nothing more than competence and expertise. His earlier comment, which had seemed clever and dismissive in the moment, now appeared petty and small-minded in contrast to the serious professional discussion taking place. The other officer's focus on Sarah's substantive contributions made his personal attack seem not just inappropriate, but irrelevant to the important work at hand. The discussion that followed Sarah's recommendations involved several other senior officers, each building upon her analysis and exploring the implications of her suggestions. Admiral Torres raised questions about resource allocation that demonstrated her own deep understanding of operational logistics. General Harrison explored the intelligence requirements that would be necessary to implement Sarah's alternative approach. Admiral Sullivan examined the special operations aspect of the modified plan, his questions revealing his recognition of Sarah as a peer whose expertise deserved serious consideration. What emerged from this extended discussion was a significantly improved operational plan that incorporated Sarah's insights while addressing the concerns raised by other experienced officers. The collaborative nature of the planning process demonstrated the kind of professional environment that produced the best results, where ideas were evaluated based on their merit rather than the rank or background of the person proposing them. Sarah's contributions had not just been acknowledged, but had fundamentally improved the mission's chances of success. During a brief break in the formal proceedings, Admiral Torres approached Sarah privately, her manner suggesting a conversation that went beyond official business. "Lieutenant," she said quietly, "I want you to know that what happened here today represents more than just recognition of your individual achievements. You've demonstrated the kind of leadership and expertise that this military needs, and I hope you understand the significance of what you've accomplished." The Admiral's words carried weight beyond their immediate meaning. Admiral Torres had navigated similar challenges throughout her own career, rising to positions of significant responsibility despite facing many of the same barriers that Sarah continued to encounter. Her acknowledgement represented not just personal encouragement, but validation from someone who understood the unique pressures and expectations that came with being among the first to break through traditional limitations. "Your analysis today was exceptional," Admiral Torres continued, "but more importantly, you handled Admiral Morrison's inappropriate comment with exactly the kind of professionalism and dignity that reflects well on your training and character. Not everyone in your position would have maintained such composure while still making their point clearly." Sarah felt a profound sense of gratitude for Admiral Torres's recognition, not just of her technical capabilities, but of the personal strength required to navigate the complex social and professional dynamics of military leadership. The Admiral's words acknowledged the additional burden that came with being a pioneer, the constant awareness that her actions would be scrutinized and interpreted as representative of all women who might follow in her path. Meanwhile, General Harrison was having his own conversation with Admiral Morrison, their discussion taking place in subdued tones near the back of the room. The general's words were measured but firm, his message clear about the unacceptable nature of Morrison's earlier comment. "Jim," he said quietly, "that young woman has saved American lives and contributed to mission success in ways that most of us can only imagine. She's earned her place here through excellence, not politics, and she deserves better than casual dismissal based on outdated stereotypes. The general's rebuke was private but unmistakable, delivered with the authority of someone whose own service record and leadership experience commanded respect throughout the military hierarchy. His defense of Sarah was not based on abstract principles of fairness or inclusion, but on his direct knowledge of her contributions and capabilities. His son's first-hand accounts of Sarah's performance under fire had given the general insights into her character and competence that went beyond what appeared in official service records. Admiral Morrison's discomfort was evident as he absorbed the general's words, realizing that his comment had not just offended Sarah, but had revealed attitudes that his peers found unacceptable and unprofessional. The isolation he felt in that moment was profound, as he began to understand that his assumptions about shared perspectives among senior leadership had been completely wrong. As the formal briefing resumed, the atmosphere in the room had been permanently altered. Sarah's presence was no longer a novelty or distraction, but an integral part of the strategic planning process. Her insights continued to shape the discussion. Her recommendations influenced operational decisions, and her expertise commanded the same respect accorded to any other qualified officer present. The transformation was complete, but its implications would extend far beyond this single meeting. The mission planning that followed incorporated many of Sarah's suggestions, creating a more sophisticated and culturally aware operational approach than had originally been envisioned. The collaborative process demonstrated the value of diverse perspectives and experiences in developing effective strategies for complex international operations. Sarah's contributions were not just acknowledged, but became central to the mission's design, proving that excellence in military service truly knew no boundaries of gender or background. Admiral Morrison's behavior for the remainder of the briefing was noticeably subdued, his earlier swagger replaced by a cautious awareness of how dramatically he had misjudged both the situation and his audience. The lesson was clear. In a modern military, leadership was about recognizing and utilizing the best talents available, regardless of whether those talents came in packages that matched traditional expectations. The weeks following the war room incident rippled through military circles with an intensity that surprised even those who had witnessed the events firsthand. News of Admiral Morrison's inappropriate comment and the unprecedented response from his peers spread through informal channels, creating conversations about leadership, respect, and recognition that reached every level of the military hierarchy. For Sarah, what had begun as a moment of personal humiliation had transformed into something far more significant and lasting. Within days of the briefing, Sarah found herself summoned to a private meeting with Admiral Torres, an invitation that carried both honor and uncertainty. The Admiral's office reflected her years of distinguished service, with commendations, photographs from various deployments, and strategic planning documents that spoke to her central role in national defense operations. But what struck Sarah most was the personal touch evident in family photographs and mementos that revealed the human being behind the military leader. Lieutenant Shun, Admiral Torres began, her tone warm but professional. I wanted to speak with you privately about what occurred during the briefing, but more importantly about what comes next. The Admiral's words carried weight that went beyond their immediate meaning, suggesting conversations and decisions that had taken place in the highest circles of military leadership since the incident. Your performance during that meeting, both in terms of your professional contributions and your personal conduct, has been the subject of considerable discussion among senior leadership, Admiral Torres continued. The kind of strategic thinking you demonstrated, combined with your operational experience and cultural expertise, represents exactly what we need as we face increasingly complex international challenges. Sarah listened carefully, sensing that this conversation would prove pivotal in ways she had not yet fully grasped. The Admiral's words suggested that her moment of visibility in the war room had led to broader recognition of her capabilities and potential contributions to military strategy and operations. But she also understood that increased visibility brought increased scrutiny and expectations. I want you to know that several of us have been discussing expanding your role in strategic planning operations, Admiral Torres revealed. Your insights during the Southeast Asia mission discussion demonstrated capabilities that we need to utilize more effectively. However, I also want to be transparent about the challenges that would come with such increased responsibility. The conversation that followed was both encouraging and sobering. Admiral Torres explained that Sarah's unique combination of operational experience, cultural knowledge, and strategic thinking had caught the attention of leaders who were responsible for some of the military's most sensitive and important operations. The Admiral spoke candidly about the opportunities that could emerge from greater involvement in high-level planning, but also about the additional pressures and expectations that would accompany such responsibilities. You need to understand, Admiral Torres said with characteristic directness, that you would be operating under a level of scrutiny that most officers never experience. Every decision you make, every recommendation you offer, every word you speak will be evaluated not just on its own merits, but as a reflection of whether women belong in these roles. It's unfair, but it's reality. Sarah appreciated the Admiral's honesty about the challenges she would face. Throughout her military career, she had grown accustomed to carrying the additional burden of representation, knowing that her failures would be attributed to her gender, while her successes would be dismissed as exceptions. But she had also learned that excellence had a way of creating its own momentum, gradually shifting perspectives and opening doors that had previously seemed permanently closed. Meanwhile, Admiral Morrison was facing consequences that extended far beyond the immediate embarrassment of his public misjudgment. A formal complaint had been filed regarding his conduct during the briefing, and he found himself the subject of an investigation that examined not just that single incident, but his broader approach to leadership and personnel management. The investigation revealed a pattern of comments and attitudes that had previously been overlooked or dismissed, but now appeared problematic in light of changing military standards and expectations. The investigation process was thorough and fair, involving interviews with personnel who had worked under Morrison's command and a comprehensive review of his leadership record. What emerged was a picture of an officer whose tactical capabilities were sound, but whose interpersonal skills and cultural awareness had not kept pace with the evolving demands of modern military leadership. His comment about Sarah had been symptomatic of broader attitudes that were increasingly incompatible with military values and operational effectiveness. The consequences for Admiral Morrison were significant, but not career-ending. He was reassigned to a position with less direct personnel responsibility and required to complete comprehensive training on leadership, diversity, and inclusion. The military's response sent a clear message about acceptable standards of conduct, while also recognizing that education and growth were preferable to simply punitive measures when dealing with officers who had otherwise served honorably. For Sarah, the most meaningful outcome of the entire incident came in the form of increased opportunities to contribute her expertise to important military operations. Her insights from the Southeast Asia mission planning proved invaluable as the operation moved forward, and her recommendations helped ensure its successful completion with minimal complications or diplomatic tensions. The mission's success validated the decision to include her perspective in the planning process and demonstrated the value of diverse expertise in developing effective strategies. The broader impact of the war room incident extended beyond individual careers to influence military culture and policy in ways that would benefit future generations of service members. The overwhelming support that Sarah had received from senior leadership became a powerful example of how excellence should be recognized and rewarded regardless of who demonstrates it. The incident became a case study in military leadership courses, illustrating both the importance of maintaining professional standards and the value of diverse perspectives in strategic planning. Sarah's expanded role in strategic operations brought her into contact with some of the military's most challenging and important missions. Her cultural knowledge and analytical capabilities proved invaluable in developing approaches to complex international situations where traditional military solutions were inadequate or inappropriate. She found herself consulting on everything from humanitarian operations to counterterrorism strategies, her expertise is sought by leaders who had learned to value capability over convention. The personal growth that accompanied Sarah's professional advancement was equally significant. The confidence she gained from receiving recognition from the highest levels of military leadership transformed her approach to her work and her expectations for her future. She began to see herself not as someone fighting for acceptance, but as a valued contributor whose presence enriched military operations and strategic thinking. The shift in perspective was liberating and empowering, allowing her to focus on excellence rather than simply survival. One of the most rewarding aspects of Sarah's increased visibility was the mentoring opportunities it created with younger female service members who saw her as proof that barriers could be overcome through dedication and excellence. She received letters and messages from women throughout the military who had been inspired by stories of her achievements and encouraged by evidence that their own ambitions were not unrealistic. Sarah took these responsibilities seriously, understanding that her success created pathways for others to follow. The relationship between Sarah and Admiral Torres evolved into a meaningful mentorship that extended beyond formal military hierarchy. The Admiral had faced many of the same challenges during her own career and understood the unique pressures and opportunities that came with being among the first to break through traditional limitations. Their conversations ranged from tactical considerations to broader questions about leadership and the evolving role of women in military service. What you accomplished in that war room, Admiral Torres told Sarah during one of their regular meetings, was more than just professional competence. You demonstrated the kind of grace under pressure that defines true leaders. The way you responded to Admiral Morrison's comment showed everyone present what character looks like in practice. These words meant more to Sarah than any formal commendation or official recognition could have conveyed. Admiral Torres's acknowledgement that her response to personal attack had demonstrated character and leadership validated the approach Sarah had developed through years of facing similar challenges. The affirmation that maintaining dignity while standing firm represented strength rather than weakness was profoundly meaningful. The changes in military culture that followed the war room incident were subtle, but significant. Officers throughout the hierarchy became more conscious of their language and attitudes, understanding that casual dismissiveness toward any service member's capabilities would not be tolerated by senior leadership. The incident became a reference point for discussions about professional conduct and the importance of evaluating personnel based on merit rather than assumptions or stereotypes. Sarah's story also influenced policy discussions about expanding opportunities for women in special operations and other traditionally male-dominated military roles. The demonstration of her capabilities and the recognition she received from senior leadership provided concrete evidence that could be used in debates about military effectiveness and personnel policies. Her success helped shift conversations from theoretical discussions about equality to practical considerations about utilizing the best available talent. As Sarah reflected on the transformation of her career and the broader changes that had emerged from a single moment of inappropriate behavior, she felt a profound sense of purpose about her continued service. The recognition she had received was gratifying, but more importantly, it had created opportunities to make meaningful contributions to military operations and to serve as an example for others who face similar challenges. The journey from that moment of humiliation in the war room to her current position of influence and respect had been remarkable, but she understood that it was just the beginning of even greater contributions to come. 2 years after the war room incident that had transformed her career, Sarah stood before a different group of military leaders in a very different capacity. The small ceremony taking place in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes was intimate but profoundly significant, marking her promotion to lieutenant commander and her appointment to a newly created position in strategic operations planning. The journey from that moment of humiliation to this moment of recognition represented not just personal achievement, but a fundamental shift in how the military understood and utilized talent. Admiral Torres stood at the podium, her voice carrying the gravity of someone who understood the historical significance of the moment she was helping to create. Today we recognize not just individual excellence, she began, but the kind of leadership that our military needs as we face the challenges of an increasingly complex world. Lieutenant Commander Chun represents the best of what we can achieve when we commit ourselves to recognizing and developing talent wherever we find it. The audience for the ceremony was carefully chosen, including many of the officers who had witnessed the original incident in the war room. Admiral Morrison was present, his attendance both a gesture of professional respect and personal redemption. The training and reflection he had undergone following the investigation had led to genuine growth in his understanding of leadership and inclusion. His presence at Sarah's promotion ceremony represented a complete transformation from the man who had made the dismissive comment that had started this remarkable journey. General Harrison, whose son continued to serve with distinction and who often spoke of Sarah's mentorship and example, delivered remarks that emphasized the practical benefits of diverse leadership in military operations. Excellence in military service is not defined by conformity to traditional expectations, he said, but by the results achieved when dedicated professionals are given the opportunity to contribute their full capabilities to our shared mission. The promotion ceremony itself was relatively brief, but its symbolism resonated throughout the military community. Sarah's new position would give her significant influence over strategic planning for operations around the world, utilizing her unique combination of operational experience, cultural expertise, and analytical capabilities. The role represented recognition that her contributions were too valuable to be limited to traditional operational assignments. As Admiral Torres pinned the new insignia on Sarah's uniform, she whispered quietly, "Your parents would be so proud of what you've accomplished." The words carried special meaning because Admiral Torres had taken the time to learn about Sarah's background and understood the sacrifices her family had made to give her the opportunities she had transformed into extraordinary achievement. The immigrant parents who had worried about their daughter's decision to leave academic security for military uncertainty could never have imagined the heights she would reach. Following the ceremony, Sarah found herself in the unusual position of receiving congratulations from officers who had once questioned her presence in military leadership. The transformation in attitudes had been gradual, but unmistakable, driven not by policy changes or sensitivity training, but by the simple demonstration of competence and character under pressure. Excellence, it turned out, had a way of converting even the most skeptical observers. The reception that followed the ceremony provided opportunities for meaningful conversations about the broader changes that had occurred within military culture. Young female officers approached Sarah throughout the evening, expressing gratitude for the example she had set and seeking advice about their own career development. These conversations reminded Sarah that her individual success had created pathways for others and established expectations that would benefit future generations of service members. One particularly meaningful encounter involved a young Navy SEAL candidate who had been inspired by Sarah's example to pursue special operations training. The conversation reminded Sarah of her own journey through the selection and training process, and the additional motivation that had come from knowing that her success would make the path easier for others to follow. The cycle of mentorship and inspiration that her achievement had created was one of its most rewarding aspects. Admiral Morrison approached Sarah during the reception, his manner suggesting a conversation that went beyond professional courtesy. "Lieutenant Commander," he began, his voice carrying genuine respect, "I want to personally apologize again for my comment during that briefing 2 years ago. More importantly, I want you to know that watching your response to my inappropriate behavior taught me something important about leadership and character that has influenced every aspect of my service since then." The apology was meaningful not because Sarah needed it for closure, but because it represented genuine personal growth and reflection. Admiral Morrison's willingness to acknowledge his mistake publicly and privately demonstrated the kind of character development that the military's emphasis on continuous improvement was designed to encourage. His transformation from someone who had dismissed her capabilities to someone who recognized and respected her achievements illustrated the power of demonstrated excellence to change hearts and minds. "Your professionalism in that moment," Admiral Morrison continued, "when you had every right to respond with anger or defensiveness, showed everyone in that room what leadership looks like in practice. I've used that example in my own leadership training ever since, and I want you to know that your grace under pressure has influenced how I approach my own interactions with subordinates and peers." The conversation represented healing and growth for both officers, demonstrating that even painful incidents could become opportunities for positive change when approached with wisdom and maturity. Sarah appreciated Admiral Morrison's words not because she needed his validation, but because they showed that the incident had created learning opportunities that extended far beyond her own career advancement. As the evening progressed, Sarah found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her from that moment of professional humiliation to this celebration of achievement and recognition. The path had been challenging in ways she could never have anticipated, requiring not just professional excellence, but personal resilience and emotional intelligence that went far beyond what was typically expected of military officers. The most profound aspect of her transformation was the realization that she no longer felt the need to prove her right to exist in military leadership roles. The recognition she had received from the highest levels of the military hierarchy had shifted her perspective from defensive survival to confident contribution. She could now focus entirely on excellence and mission accomplishment rather than constantly fighting for basic respect and acceptance. Sarah's new role in strategic operations would involve oversight of missions around the world, utilizing her expertise in cultural analysis, operational planning, and risk assessment. The position represented the kind of responsibility that had once seemed impossible for someone with her background, but which now felt like a natural progression of her demonstrated capabilities and contributions. The military had learned to see her not as an exception to traditional expectations, but as an example of the talent that could be developed when barriers were removed and excellence was recognized. The mentorship responsibilities that came with her increased visibility were among the most meaningful aspects of her new position. Sarah had begun developing formal programs to support other service members who faced similar challenges in breaking through traditional limitations. Her initiatives focused on practical support, professional development, and creating networks that could help talented individuals navigate the complex dynamics of military career advancement. One of the most significant projects Sarah had undertaken was the development of training materials for military leaders on recognizing and developing diverse talent. The curriculum drew heavily on her own experiences and those of other pioneering service members who had faced similar challenges. The goal was not to create special accommodations or lower standards, but to ensure that excellent performers were recognized and supported regardless of whether they fit traditional profiles. The impact of Sarah's work extended beyond individual career development to influence broader military policy and culture. Her research and recommendations had contributed to changes in evaluation criteria, leadership development programs, and operational planning processes that made the military more effective at utilizing all available talent. The improvements benefited everyone, not just those who had traditionally faced barriers to advancement. As the promotion ceremony concluded and guests began to depart, Sarah stood quietly in the Hall of Heroes, surrounded by the portraits and memorials of military leaders who had made extraordinary contributions to national defense throughout American history. Her own portrait would not hang in this hallowed space, but her influence on military culture and her contributions to operational effectiveness would be felt for generations to come. The young woman who had nervously adjusted her uniform before entering the war room 2 years earlier had evolved into a confident leader whose expertise was sought by the highest levels of military command. The transformation represented more than personal achievement. It demonstrated the power of persistence, excellence, and character to overcome even the most entrenched barriers and expectations. Admiral Torres approached as Sarah stood contemplating the portraits around her. "The officers whose images hang here," the Admiral said quietly, "all faced moments when they had to choose between accepting limitations imposed by others or proving that excellence knows no boundaries. You've joined their ranks not by hanging your portrait on these walls, but by opening doors that will never be closed again." The words captured perfectly what Sarah had accomplished through her journey from that moment of dismissal to this celebration of recognition. She had not just succeeded individually, but had fundamentally changed expectations and possibilities for everyone who would follow. The path she had blazed would make the journey easier for others, ensuring that future generations of service members would be evaluated based on their capabilities rather than limited by outdated assumptions. As Sarah left the Pentagon that evening, she carried with her not just the satisfaction of personal achievement, but the profound sense of purpose that came from knowing her success had created opportunities for others and contributed to a more effective and inclusive military. The journey that had begun with casual dismissal had become a story of transformation, recognition, and the enduring power of excellence to change hearts, minds, and institutions. The girl from Chinatown who had surprised everyone by choosing military service over academic security had become a leader whose influence would be felt throughout the military for years to come. Her story had become proof that the American military's greatest strength lay not in tradition for its own sake, but in its ability to recognize and develop the best talent available, regardless of where that talent originated or what form it took. Sarah Chun had not just broken through barriers. She had proven that excellence, persistence, and character could transform not just individual careers, but entire institutional cultures.